The colony should have died, that was the simple truth buried in the footnote. Not a dramatic truth, not the kind that got recorded in history books or carved into monuments, just a quiet, administrative truth sitting in a 300-year-old cargo manifest, in a font so small Solon Idari had to lean forward in his chair to read it, rerooted. Consignment medical grade antivirals. Class 4 destination amended, human. Colony Verith 7, authorization. Vithara Trade House, no compensation. Requested. He read it twice. Then a third time, then he sat back and looked at the ceiling of his small office on the station and said nothing. For a long time, Solon Idari was not an important man. That was not false modesty, it was just accurate. He was a mid-level diplomatic attaché assigned to monitor trade proceedings at the Conclave of Weights, which was itself a mid-level summit dressed in the costume of something in grandeur. His job was to observe, file reports, shake hands at receptions, and not embarrass the delegation. He was good at all of those things. He was particularly good at not being noticed, which is a skill that looks like nothing from the outside but takes real discipline to maintain. He also read old ledgers, had done it since the academy when a professor of interstellar economic history had told his class half bored that the true story of any civilization was never in its speeches. It was in its invoices. Solon had believed that, still did. The manifest he was reading now was not supposed to be interesting. He had pulled it from the Vithara Cultural Archive, a small digital collection that the Drathan Compact technically administered and practically ignored while looking for trade route data to cross-reference with current docking fees. Routine work, the kind that fills hours and produces nothing anyone reads, but the footnote Verith 7. And GT clears throat. And GT, he knew that name. Every human diplomat of a certain age knew that name. The way you know the name of a bridge that almost wasn't built, not because you thought about it often, but because it came up in enough foundational histories that it lodged somewhere. Verith 7 was one of humanity's earliest deep space colonies. Second wave, planted in a corridor of space that turned out to be harder to supply than anyone had predicted when the plague hit, a respiratory collapse that the colony's medical infrastructure simply wasn't equipped for the resupply. Ships were 3 months out. The colony's population was 60,000. The history books said the resupply arrived in time. They never said someone moved it. Solon pulled up everything he could find on the Vithara Trade House, which was not much. The Vithara were not a species given to self-promotion. They were archivists by nature, patient, long-memoried, precise in their record-keeping, and almost invisible in their dealings. They had operated a modest trade network in a quiet corridor of the galaxy for centuries before the Drathan Compact arrived. Now they were a protectorate, which was the Compact's polite word for something that wasn't polite at all. He found 3 more footnotes before midnight. Each one was the same pattern: a Vithara vessel, a rerouted cargo, a human destination, distress, no compensation requested. The date spanned 40 years. The earliest was during what human historians called the Silence years, when humanity's colonial expansion had outrun its logistics, its economy, and its ability to respond to crises faster than they multiplied. Dozens of colonies had been on the edge. During that period, several had not survived. More had survived than the official record explained. Solon did not sleep that night. He sat with the manifests and a cold cup of something that had been tea 2 hours ago and thought about what it meant that a civilization had quietly kept 60,000 humans alive, and then another colony, and then another, and had filed it all under routine rerouting, no compensation requested, and never once mentioned it to anyone. He thought about the Vithara representative he had seen in the main conclave hall that afternoon, Elder Sath. She was old, very old even by Vithara standards, and she sat in the Protectorate Gallery, which was positioned behind the primary delegate seats and to the left, close enough to observe and far enough to signal that observation was all they were permitted. She had a stillness to her that Solon had noticed, because it was not the stillness of patience. It was the stillness of someone who had learned over a very long time that movement costs things. He thought about that for a while, then he composed a message, not to his superior in the delegation, not to the Trade Analysis Office. He sent it to an address that most people in the diplomatic corps had never used, an office whose existence was technically public and practically unknown. Office of Historical Obligations. Earth-based, staffed by 12 people whose job title on official rosters read simply as Times Archival Reconciliation Specialist. He kept the message short. He attached the manifests. He wrote, "I think someone kept a ledger. We forgot to check." He sent it and expected to wait days. The reply came in 4 hours. He almost missed it because he had finally fallen asleep at his desk, face resting on his folded arms, the cold tea pushed to one side. The alert woke him. He opened it with the specific disorientation of someone surfacing from deep water. The message was also short. "We see it. We have seen it for 80 years. We were waiting for the right moment." Solon read that sentence several times. Then he read it again. 80 years. He stood up, walked to the narrow viewport in his office wall outside. The station turned slowly against a sky full of other stations, other ships, the quiet machinery of a galactic economy that mostly ran without noticing who it crushed on the way. The Drathan Compact's administrative hub was visible from here, a massive structure lit and busy at all hours, confident in the particular way that large things are confident, the kind of confidence that comes from never having had to think about what it would cost to lose. Below it, in the Protectorate docking ring, a single Vithara vessel sat still. Solon looked at it for a long time. He had spent his career being unremarkable, attending summits, filing reports, watching large things move and recording their movement. He had not understood until this moment that there might be a kind of work that looked exactly like that, patient, quiet, invisible, and was something else entirely underneath. The Office of Historical Obligations had been watching for 80 years. He thought about what that meant. The kind of organization you build if you intend to wait that long. The kind of discipline required to hold something that long without spending it too early. The kind of people who understood at an institutional level that a debt does not expire just because no one is collecting. He looked at the Vithara ship again, small, old, docked in a ring that wasn't really theirs anymore. He sent one more message. To the office. Just 3 words, I am ready, the reply. This time took 11 minutes, then so are we. The conclave of weights was designed to feel fair. That was important to understand. The Drathan Compact had not built it to look like a cage. They had built it to look like a table long, well lit with seats for everyone and refreshments that were always slightly better than expected. The Protectorate species sat in their designated gallery. The trade terms were presented in clear language. Proceedings were recorded and archived. The cage was in the math. Every Protectorate species arrived at the conclave carrying debt from the previous cycle. The debt was always explained, always itemized, always technically accurate. It was also always structured so that the interest accumulated slightly faster than the Protectorate's capacity to earn, not dramatically faster, just enough. The Drathan Compact had been doing this for a long time, and they were very good at calibrating the gap between what was possible and what was achievable, small enough that no one could call it intentional, large enough that no one ever got out. Solon sat in the observer gallery, a different gallery from the Protectorate's, with slightly better chairs and a direct sightline to the main floor, and watched Elder Sath take her seat. She moved carefully, the way old things move when they have learned the cost of carelessness. She set her documents on the table in front of her with both hands. She did not look around the room. She already knew what was in it. The Drathan consul opened the proceedings with the traditional language about partnership and shared prosperity, which everyone in the room understood was not meant to be believed, only acknowledged. The delegates nodded at the appropriate moments. The Protectorate representatives listened in the way of people who have heard the same speech many times and have stopped counting. Solon watched Elder Sath's hands. She had them folded on the table in front of her, very still. He had noticed this the day before in a corridor outside the main hall when a Drathan administrative officer had walked past her without acknowledgement, not rudely, just completely, as though she were furniture. Her hands had not moved, her expression had not changed, but something in the set of her shoulders had shifted just briefly, in the way of a person absorbing something they have absorbed so many times that the body barely registers it anymore, and that is itself the saddest part. He had filed that observation away the same way he filed everything, quietly, without knowing yet what it was for. The human delegation occupied 6 seats in the observer gallery. They had attended every conclave for 60 years in this capacity, observers, not participants, present by courtesy of a trade access agreement that gave them the right to monitor proceedings in any compact administered venue. The Drathan found this mildly charming in the way that large institutions find the habits of smaller ones charming, with a tolerance that is very close to dismissal. The humans asked questions, sometimes polite questions, technical questions about tariff structures and supply chain routing. They took detailed notes. They sent representatives who were always professional, always prepared, always slightly more informed about Vethera trade history than anyone expected, which was noted and then not thought about. Further, they also brought gifts, not large gifts, not impressive ones, but specific ones, a piece of Vethera music, restored from a damaged archive and pressed onto a small data tablet, presented to Elder Sathi at the Previous conclave by a human representative whose name Solon had. Looked up a woman named Petra I, who had spent 30 years in the archival reconciliation division and retired quietly afterward. Before that, a collection of botanical samples from a Vethera colony world that the compact had decommissioned, seeds preserved in a human university xenobiology vault. Returned without ceremony, the Drathan had noted these gestures as sentimental. The word appeared in their internal assessment reports which Solon had read. In the Observer archive, humans tend toward sentiment. Diplomatically manageable, he looked at his hands now. He was holding a small data pad with the account figures on it. He had been carrying it for 2 days, without knowing how to begin the conversation it would require. The Office of Historical Obligations had given him one instruction: find a way to let her see it before the formal proceedings end. He had been thinking about that instruction ever since. Clear's throat. The recess came mid-afternoon. The delegates moved toward the refreshment area. Solon moved toward the Protectorate Gallery exit. He waited in the corridor outside. Elder Sci-Fi came out 3 minutes later, alone. She saw him and did not slow her pace, but also did not change course. He fell into step beside her, which was either presumptuous or it wasn't, and he was about to find out which. Elder Sci-Fi, he said, I apologize for the informal approach. Informal is fine, she said. Her voice was low and precise. Formal would have required a request through compact channels, which would have been reviewed, which would have added 3 days. He looked at her. She looked ahead. You knew I wanted to speak with you, he said. I noticed you in the Observer Gallery yesterday. You were watching me, not the proceedings. People who watch proceedings take notes. You were not taking notes. He considered that. I was taking a different kind of note. She stopped walking. They were in a side corridor, quiet, the kind of space that exists in every large administrative building and is never quite as empty as it looks. Show me, she said. He handed her the data pad. She looked at it. The numbers were large. 80 years of licensing fees above market, docking payments, rerouted trade credits, all accumulating in a holding account under a trust structure that compact financial surveillance had never flagged, because it had been constructed piece by piece to look like routine commercial activity from a dozen different human firms. She was still for a long time, not the trained stillness he had observed in the conclave hall. Something different, something that looked from the outside like a person trying to hold a large thing without letting it show on their face. The antivirals, she said finally, for Verith 7 and 6 other colonies. He said, we found all of them. She handed the data pad back. Her hands, he noticed, were not quite steady. You have been building this for 80 years, she said. The office has. I'm new to the file. He paused. We do not think of it as building something. We think of it as carrying something until the right moment to set it down. She looked at him then. Really looked the way people do when they are deciding something. What is the right moment, she asked. The conclave ends in 4 days, he said. The filing window for third-party guarantee interventions under compact charter law opens on the final day. It closes 6 hours later. She understood. He could see it in the way her expression did not change, which was itself a form of response. You have the Documentation, she said, 12,000 pages. Ready to file. The corridor was quiet. Around them, somewhere further down the station, the conclave was resuming. Delegates were moving back to their seats. The Drathan console was preparing to present the next cycle's debt schedule for the Protectorate. Species which would be detailed and accurate and almost impossible to escape. You were waiting, Elder Soth said. Not a question, we were ready, Solon said. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment longer. Yes, she said, there is. The clause was on page 412, not buried. That was the elegant part. It was right there, in clean official language, in a section titled Times, Obligations of Debt Succession, and Third-Party Standing, which was exactly the kind of heading that made people's eyes slide off a page and onto the next. 1. The Drathan Compact's founders had written it to formalize the process by which a debt or civilization could be absorbed when no other party held prior claim. They had not considered that the clause worked in both directions. If a third party could demonstrate prior undisclosed obligation to a protectorate species, meaning a debt that predated the compact's acquisition of that species and had never been formally registered, that third party could file as guarantor, and a guarantor under compact charter law had standing to intervene in the debt proceedings, to contest the terms, to propose an alternative structure. The Drathan had written that provision to prevent rival powers from poaching their acquisitions through manufactured debt claims. They had written it carefully with specific evidentiary requirements because they had not wanted it abused. Those evidentiary requirements were exactly what 12,000 pages of human documentation satisfied. Solon filed on the 4th day of the conclave, 20 minutes after the window opened. He did it from a small office he had borrowed from the human trade delegation, a plain room with a plain desk and a wall screen that showed the station's exterior view, stars and docking arms in the quiet movement of ships. 2 people from the Office of Historical Obligations were present via secure link, their faces small in the corner of his display. They had not slept, neither had he. He hit submit. The filing registered the compact's legal intake system. Acknowledged receipt. Then for about 40 seconds nothing happened. Then 3 different administrative alerts fired simultaneously in the Drathan Compact's legal division. He could not see that, but he knew it was happening. The formal response came 6 hours later, which was faster than standard processing, which told him the compact had immediately understood something unusual had landed. The response was a challenge. Brief, 17 grounds for rejection, presented in clean, precise language that radiated the confidence of an institution that had never lost a filing challenge in its own courts. Solon forwarded it to the office without comment. They replied in 2 hours. We concede ground 7. Date discrepancy, manifest ref 4471, see error on our end. We hold the other 16. He read that and felt something settle in his chest. Not relief, too early for relief. Something more like the feeling of a foundation being confirmed solid underfoot. The Drathan legal team was good. They were genuinely good, and he respected that, the way you can respect an opponent's skill without changing what you intend to do. They found 3 additional technical challenges over the following 48 hours. Each time the office responded. Each time the human position held. The Compact's legal division was not panicking, not yet. But they were working harder than they had expected to work, which in an institution like theirs was itself a form of disruption. Elder Sci-Fi watched the proceedings from the Protectorate gallery. She had been informed, Solon had made sure of that, but she could not be a visible participant. The filing had to be a human action. That was what gave it standing. Her involvement had to remain what it had always been. The original act of kindness that had started everything, recorded in footnotes, witnessed by no one, which was now the foundation of every argument the human lawyers were making. On the third day of the legal challenge, the Draythan consul, not the young careful one but the senior consul, the one who ran the proceedings, requested an informal meeting. Solon agreed. They met in a reception room off the main conclave hall, the kind of room designed for exactly this type of conversation, neutral quiet with two chairs and a low table, and the unspoken agreement that nothing said here would appear in the official record. The consul was a large man by Draythan standards, which meant he took up space in a way that was probably meant to be felt. He had the look of someone who had been navigating institutional power for a very long time and was comfortable with most of what it required. He was not comfortable right now. I will be direct, the consul said, which Solon had learned in years of diplomatic work usually meant the opposite was about to happen. Please, Solon said, this filing is an anomaly. The evidentiary record is unusual. The legal structure is, he paused, creative. It is standard charter law, Solon said. We applied it as written. You applied it in a way it has never been applied before. That is not the same as incorrectly. The consul looked at him. There was something in that look that was almost curious, the expression of a man trying to locate the edge of something and finding the edge kept moving. What do you want? He asked. The question was genuine. What is the human agenda here? What are you building toward? Solon considered this, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to give the honest one, which sometimes takes a moment to find the right shape. We want the Vithara debt schedule restructured under guarantor terms, he said. We want the cultural archive materials currently held in compact administrative storage transferred to Vithara custody. We want the 3 colony stations classified as protectorate infrastructure reclassified as sovereign assets, and in exchange nothing. Solon said, we are not in exchange for anything. We are fulfilling an obligation. The consul stared at him. An obligation from 300 years ago. He said, an obligation is an obligation. Solon said, we don't think the age changes what it is. There was a long silence. The consul was doing the thing that powerful people do when the situation has moved in a direction they did not plan for, and they are trying to locate the new edges before responding. Solon waited. He was good at waiting. The filing will be reviewed by the full legal panel, the consul said finally. We expect that, Solon said. We are prepared for it. The consul stood. The meeting was over. He paused at the door. You have been preparing for a long time, he said. Not quite a question. Long enough, Solon said. After the consul left, Solon sat for a moment in the quiet room. He thought about the Vithara cargo. Manifests. He thought about 60,000 people on a colony that should have died, who lived because a quiet species of archivists had rerouted a shipment and asked for nothing back. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of civilization that did something like that and filed it under routine. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of civilization that remembered. He sent one message to the office, holding all 16 grounds, proceeding to full panel. The reply came fast this time. Good. This is what we built it for. The legal panel ruled on a Tuesday. It ruled in humanity's favor on 14 of 16 grounds. The remaining 2 were deferred pending additional documentation, which the Office of Historical Obligations provided within 72 hours. The final ruling came down 11 days after the initial filing. The Vethara debt schedule was to be restructured under third-party guarantor terms. The cultural archive materials transferred. The 3 colony stations reclassified. No ceremony, no announcement. A legal document filed and registered, dry and precise and completely unremarkable in its language. It changed everything anyway. Solon was not present for the ruling. He had left the station 3 days earlier, reassigned to a trade monitoring post in a different sector, because his work at the conclave had been classified as administrative and complete. His supervisor had sent a brief message acknowledging the filing. Outcome. Good outcome, clean work. That was all. He was already on a transport when the ruling came through, sitting in a middle seat with a cup of something warm, reading through the next assignment briefing. He did not mind. He had not done it to be present for the ending, but the ending was not, as it turned out, an ending. The first signal came from a species called the Hevari, small traders, 3 generations under compact protectorate status, operating a cluster of mining stations in a corridor that humanity's shipping lanes did not touch. A junior diplomat from their administrative office sent a message to the human embassy on a compact adjacent station. The message was carefully worded. It did not use the words times, filing times, or times guarantor times, or times third-party intervention. It said essentially, we would like to ask some questions about interstellar contract law. The embassy forwarded it to the Office of Historical Obligations. The office replied. The second signal came from the Tessin, an agricultural species whose food export routes had been quietly restructured over the previous 2 decades to route through compact taxed corridors. They did not send a message. They sent a historian, an older woman, who arrived at a human research station and asked with great politeness if anyone there had access to trade archive records from the early compact expansion era. She was given access. She spent 4 days in the archive room. She left without saying anything further. The office noted her visit. They already had a file on the Tessin. They had files on most of the protectorate species. They had been building those files for a very long time, going through old records the way Solon went through old ledgers, looking for the same pattern. A kindness, unrecorded, unrewarded, filed under routine and forgotten by everyone except the people who received it. The pattern, it turned out, was not rare. Humanity had been moving through the galaxy for a long time. In that time it had done many things: built stations, lost colonies, negotiated badly, negotiated Well-made enemies made allies failed dramatically and recovered quietly. It had also, in ways that no one had ever assembled into a single picture, helped people, not always intentionally, not always wisely, but consistently, the way that any civilization with a strong instinct toward problem-solving helps. Because when they see something broken, they try to fix it, and they don't always think to write it down properly. When they do, someone had been writing it down. The Drethan Compact did not fracture. Solon had not expected it to a structure that large does not break from a single legal ruling, no matter how cleanly won. What happened was subtler. The ruling had demonstrated something that could not be easily undemonstrated, that the Compact's own legal framework contained a mechanism that worked against them if the evidentiary record was strong enough. That mechanism had always been there. They had written it themselves, but no one had ever had the documentation to use it before. Now, other species knew it existed. The arithmetic changed. Not loudly, not all at once, but in the quiet offices of a dozen small civilizations, people who had been doing the calculation of whether escape was possible and arriving always at null, began doing it again with a new variable included. Almond variable. Solon heard about some of this secondhand in messages from colleagues and occasional updates from the office. He did not hear about all of it. He was on his new assignment, doing work that looked exactly like the work he had always done, attending meetings, filing reports, watching large things move, and it looked that way because it was that way. He was not the center of what was happening. No one person was. That was not how the office worked. That was not. He had come to understand how humanity worked when it was working at its best, not through singular heroes or decisive moments, but through patience, accumulation, a long memory, and the organizational discipline to act on it. He was in a transit lounge on the third day after the ruling when he heard, through a public news feed, that the first Vethara cultural station had reopened. It was a small item, brief. The station had been closed for over a century. Its archives held in compact administrative storage under a classification that amounted to slow erasure. Now it was open. The item did not mention humans. It did not mention the filing or the ruling or the legal challenge. It said only that the station had been returned to Vethara administration and would operate as a public archive and educational resource. Solon read it twice, then he set down his cup and walked to the viewport and stood there for a while, watching the ships move. He thought about Elder Sath. He wondered if she was there at the station for its opening. He thought probably she was, and that probably she did not make a speech, because that was not how she moved through world. She would just be present, watching her people walk through the doors of something that had been theirs all along. He did not send her a message. There was nothing to say that the moment was not already saying. Better than he could, he sent one message to the office instead, short as they tended to be. Ledger, balanced. The reply came in 4 minutes. We have 14 others in queue. He looked at that for a moment. Then he put his data pad away, picked up his cup again, and watched the ships. 14 others. He thought about what that meant. 14 other species somewhere in the galaxy that humanity had helped in ways that had been filed under routine and forgotten. 14 other debts waiting in the books, 14 other moments somewhere ahead when the right person would find the right footnote and sit with it for a long time. In a quiet office, he thought about all the people who had built the offices, files year after year, decade after decade, doing work that looked like nothing from the outside. He thought about the professor from the academy who had told his class, half bored, that the true story of any civilization was in its invoices. He finished his transport was boarding in 20 minutes. He had a new assignment to get to. 18 months after the ruling, the Drathan Compact requested a formal diplomatic meeting with humanity, not about the Vithara. That matter was settled, filed, and legally closed. Compact did not reopen closed things. That was one of their institutional disciplines, and it was Solon had to admit a good one. They moved forward. They adapted. They had been operating long enough to understand that the cost of holding on to a loss was usually higher than the cost of incorporating it. The meeting was about trade access, infrastructure partnership, a proposal to co-develop a supply corridor in a sector where human logistics networks had quietly become, over the previous several decades, more reliable than anyone had formally acknowledged. Compact needed what humanity had built. They were prepared to negotiate for it. In good faith, it was a routine meeting. Professional, the kind of meeting that produced long documents and modest agreements and very little that anyone would later describe as interesting. Humanity sent a representative named Counselor Addis Farum, who was experienced and thorough and had a talent for the specific kind of patience that trade negotiations require. The Drathan consul was young and careful and had been chosen visibly to signal that the compact was looking forward. Neither of them mentioned the Vithara ruling. Solon Adair was not there. He was 3 sectors away, attending a different summit, doing the same work he had always done. The meeting on his assignment log was listed as a routine trade monitoring session. His report afterward would be 2 pages, accurate and unlikely to be read by anyone above his immediate supervisor. He was by most measures still unremarkable. He was fine with that. On a Vithara station, the cultural archive, newly reopened, still smelling faintly of the renovation work that had taken 6 months and 3 teams of specialists. An old archivist named Thesson was teaching. His students were 3 children, somewhere between 7 and 10, in Vithara years, sitting cross-legged on low cushions in a room whose walls were lined with physical text, real printed material, actual old documents behind sealed transparent panels, things that had survived because the humans had archived them before the compact's administrative period had turned archiving into erasure. Thesson was teaching them the old script, the written form of their ancestral language, which had not been in regular use for 2 generations because the compact's administrative language had replaced it. In all official contexts, the children were struggling with the letter forms. They found it funny when they got them wrong, a good sign, Thesson thought. The kind of children who laughed at their own mistakes were the kind who kept trying. He was patient with them. He had been an archivist for 50 years. Patience was not something he had to work at anymore. Solon Adair happened to be walking past the open doorway on his way to transit connection at the station's far end. He had a bag over one shoulder and a data pad in his other hand. He was reading the data pad which contained his next briefing, and he almost walked past without looking up. Something made him pause. He stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. The old archivist demonstrating a letter with slow, careful strokes. The children copying it, getting it wrong, laughing, trying again. The room around them full of documents that had been preserved in a human vault for 80 years and returned without ceremony. None of them knew he was there. He did not introduce himself. He did not say anything. He watched for maybe 40 seconds. Then he kept walking. In a government building on a HFY station, a junior diplomat named Kors had been working through a stack of legal reference documents for 3 weeks. The documents were dense, full of specific contractual language, and they described a process that she had not known existed until 18 months ago, when a quiet inquiry to a human embassy had returned unexpectedly an offer to explain it in detail. Third-party guarantee filing. Third party standing under compact. Charter law, the evidentiary requirements, the documentation standards. She understood it now. She understood it well enough to have drafted in careful language preliminary filing structure for the HFY case. Different facts, different history, but the same underlying legal mechanism. She had been building it piece by piece, the same way she supposed someone had built the HFY case, one document at a time over many years. She was not sure how long it would take. She was not in a hurry. She had learned from the human contact at the Office of Historical Obligations, a patient woman named Telly who sent clear messages and answered every question without condescension, that the work was the work. You built the record until the record was strong enough. Then you filed. She had also learned from Telly that the office had files on 8 other species currently in compact protectorate status. Not all of them had strong cases. Some of them had nothing. Humanity had no prior obligation to them, no old kindness in the ledgers, no forgotten footnote. Those cases the office could not help, but some of them did. 3 sectors from the HFY station in a Drathan compact financial analysis office. A woman named Rethsoa was preparing a report. She was good at her job. She had been good at it for 20 years. She tracked trade relationships, financial flows, institutional patterns, the kind of analysis that the compact relied on to understand how the galaxy's economy was actually moving as opposed to how it was officially described. She had been assigned to analyze humanity's economic footprint in protectorate-adjacent sectors over the previous decade. The assignment was supposed to take 2 weeks. It had taken 5, because every time she thought she had the full picture, she found something else. Human shipping routes that had been operating at above-market rates in Vethara space for decades. And GT snorts. And GT human university archives that contained records of species the compact had considered fully absorbed, human biotech, patents with licensing structures that fed into external accounts she had taken a long time to trace, because they had been built to look like 12 separate things instead of one. She had built a timeline. She kept having to extend it backward. Now she was looking at the founding charter of the Office of Historical Obligations, which was a publicly accessible document she had found in a standard registry search. Its stated purpose was the archival reconciliation of historical interspecies obligations. A description so dry that she had almost moved past it. Its founding date was what had stopped her. She looked at it again. The office had been founded 30 years before the Drathan Compact's major expansion. 30 years before the first Protectorate absorptions, before most of the events that the Vithara filing had referenced. She sat with that for a long time, then she started going back. Further, she pulled records. Old ones, trade logs from before the Compact's current form, commercial manifests from the early expansion era. She was looking for the pattern, the same pattern she had found in the Vithara material, the quiet, consistent rhythm of a civilization that helped people and wrote it down and did not mention it and did not forget. She found 3 instances in the first hour. She stopped counting after 7. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling of her office. She thought about the Vithara ruling. She thought about the Compact's legal panel, which had reviewed 12,000 pages of documentation that had been assembled over 80 years and had found it on 14 of 16 grounds airtight. She thought about the consul who had asked the human representative what he wanted and had been told to balance a ledger. She thought about 14 others in queue. She did not know where she had heard that number. She was not sure she had heard it anywhere. It might have been something she had read in a secondary report, or it might have been something her mind had assembled from the pattern of what she was finding. Either way, it felt right. She opened a new document and began typing her report. She wrote for a long time. Near the end, she added a note that was not standard for analytical reports, but that she could not leave out. Humanity keeps records, all of them going back further than anyone thought to check. Recommend full retrospective audit of all Compact acquisition era interactions with human adjacent species. Priority high. Timeline immediate. She reviewed the sentence, then she added one more line. We have been reading the wrong ledgers. She saved it. She sent it. She sat very still for a moment in her quiet office, in a building full of people who had not yet read what she had just sent, in a galaxy that was already in 14 slow-moving, patient, document-heavy ways beginning to shift. Humanity had a long memory. She was only now understanding what that meant.